Hello. Oh, the people of Colorado are so friendly. Are you all on marijuana? Is that it? Yeah, I figured. You'll enjoy this a lot more if you're high. I'm really pleased to be here. It's my first time in Colorado. It's a lot warmer than I expected. That was a surprise. And in particular, I'm really happy to be here at this absolutely beautiful library. It's vibrant, it's beautifully proportioned. To paraphrase our president, this is not a shithole. So well done. Particular thanks to the librarians who are hosting me. As a former publisher, I'm keenly aware, probably more than most, of the pressures and challenges that libraries and librarians have faced in recent years. I'm also aware of the ways in which you've persevered and overcome them. So I think I speak on behalf of the publishing community at large, both writers and publishers, when I salute your perseverance. You are the backbone of American literacy and a key vertebra in our nation's culture. So, yeah, good for you. I'm going to inflict upon you a quick reading from The Woman in the Window before proceeding to my talk, after which there will be a Q&A. Please be advised that I have a peculiar tic. Well, I have quite a few peculiar tics, but when reading aloud, I tend to yawn. I don't know if it's because I'm not getting enough oxygen. It is not you if I yawn. I sort of want to get a yawn out of the way, but I don't actually have to yet. Chapter 1. Her husband's almost home. He'll catch her this time. There isn't a scrap of curtain, not a blade of blind, in number 212, the rust-red townhome that once housed the newlywed Motts until they unwed. I never met either Mott, but occasionally I check in online, his LinkedIn profile, her Facebook page. Their wedding registry lives on at Macy's. I could still buy them flatware. As I was saying, not even a window dressing. So number 212 gazes blankly across the street, ruddy and raw, and I gaze right back, watching the mistress of the manor lead her contractor into the guest bedroom. What is it about that house? It's where love goes to die. She's lovely, a genuine redhead with grass-green eyes and an archipelago of tiny moles trailing across her back. Much prettier than her husband, a Dr. John Miller, psychotherapist. Yes, he offers couples counseling, and one of 436,000 John Millers online. This particular specimen works near Gramercy Park and does not accept insurance. According to the deed of sale, he paid $3.6 million for his house. Business must be good. I know both more and less about the wife. Not much of a homemaker, clearly. The Millers moved in 8 weeks ago, yet still those windows are bare, tisk tisk. She practices yoga 3 times a week, tripping down the steps with her magic carpet mat rolled beneath one arm, legs shrink-wrapped in Lululemon. And she must volunteer someplace. She leaves the house a little past 11 on Mondays and Fridays, around the time I get up, and returns between 5 and 5:30, just as I'm settling in for my nightly film. This evening's selection, The Man Who Knew Too Much, for the umpteenth time. I am the woman who viewed too much. I've noticed she likes a drink in the afternoon, as do I. Does she like a drink in the morning, as do I? But her age is a mystery, although she's certainly younger than Dr. Miller and younger than I am, nimbler too. Her name I can only guess at. I think of her as Rita because she looks like Hayworth in Gilda. I'm not in the least interested. Love that line. I myself am very much interested, not in her body, the pale ridge of her spine, her shoulder blades like stunted wings, the baby blue bra clasping her breasts. Whenever these loom within my lens, any of them, I look away, but in the life she leads, the lives, 2 more than I've got. Her husband rounded the corner a moment ago, just past noon, not long after his wife pressed the front door shut, contractor in tow. This is an aberration. On Sundays, Dr. Miller returns to the house at 3:15 without fail. Yet now he strides down the sidewalk, breath chugging from his mouth, briefcase swinging from one hand, wedding band winking. I zoom in on the good doctor's feet, oxblood Oxfords, slick with polish, collecting the autumn sunlight, kicking it off with each step. I lift the camera to his head. My Nikon D5500 doesn't miss much, not with that Optica lens. Unruly marled hair, glasses spindly and cheap, islets of stubble in the shallow ponds of his cheeks. He takes better care of his shoes than his face. Back to number 212, where Rita and the contractor are speedily disrobing. I could dial directory assistance, call the house, warn them. I won't. Watching is like nature photography. You don't interfere with the wildlife. Dr. Miller is maybe half a minute away from the front door. His wife's mouth glosses the contractor's neck. Off with her blouse. 4 more steps. 5, 6, 7. 20 seconds now at most. She seizes his tie between her teeth, grins at him. Her hands fumble with his shirt. He grazes on her ear. Her husband hops over a buckled slab of sidewalk. 15 seconds. I can almost hear the tie slithering out of his collar. She whips it across the room. 10 seconds. I zoom in again, the snout of the camera practically twitching. His hand dives into his pocket, surfaces with a haul of keys. 7 seconds. She unlooses her ponytail, hair swinging onto her shoulders. 3 seconds. He mounts the steps. She folds her arms around his back, kisses him deep. He stabs the key into the lock, twists. I zoom in on her face, the eyes sprung wide. She's heard. I snap a photo. And then his briefcase flops open. A flock of papers bursts from it, scatters in the wind. I jolt the camera back to Dr. Miller, to the crisp shoot his mouth shapes. He sets the briefcase on the stoop, stamps a few sheets beneath those glinting shoes, scoops others into his arms. One tearaway scrap is snagged in the fingers of a tree he doesn't notice. Rita, again, plunging her arms into her sleeves, pushing her hair back. She speeds from the room. The contractor, marooned, hops off the bed and retrieves his tie, stuffs it into his pocket. I exhale, air hissing out of a balloon. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. The front door opens. Rita surges down the steps, calling to her husband. He turns. I expect he smiles. I can't see. She stoops, peels some papers from the sidewalk. The contractor appears at the door, one hand sunk in his pocket, the other raised in greeting. Dr. Miller waves back. He ascends to the landing, lifts his briefcase, and the 2 men shake. They walk inside, trailed by Rita. Well, maybe next time. I'm really pleased with myself for not yawning. Right, so here's an alarming statistic. In the 5 minutes, 18 seconds since I took the podium, another 44 psychological thrillers have been published. Guess what kind of book I've written? The Woman in the Window is indeed a psychological thriller, a sort of rear window for the 21st century. Our narrator is an agoraphobe, once a respected child psychologist, who now whiles away her days in the vast halls of her Harlem townhouse, spying on her neighbors as she glugs wine and watches old movies. One night, she believes she's witnessed a crime in a house across the park, but being agoraphobic, she can't set foot outside to investigate, nor can she persuade anyone to believe her. Is the danger real, or is it imagined? Despite the heavy traffic in this market, I'd like to think that there are a few elements that distinguish The Woman in the Window beyond its title, and so, Ghost of Christmas Past style, I'm going to whisk you back in time. The scene, New York, 1989. The cast, me and my parents, who disappear from this story early on. I'm age 9, and they had gone shopping at a local mall, where, for want of a babysitter, they deposited me at the movie theater. Find a film to watch, my mother instructed me. That's as parental as my parents got. The options were limited. There was The Vanishing, a Dutch thriller already acclaimed as one of the 20th century's most terrifying films. And I don't remember the other film, actually, because trauma will do that to a kid. The Vanishing is a movie with ice in its veins. No less than Stanley Kubrick proclaimed it the scariest film he'd ever seen. The story of a man whose girlfriend disappears from a rest area gas station. It builds ineluctably towards a finale that the critic Roger Ebert described as horrifying but probably inevitable. And I would go a step further. I would call it indelible. It's an ending you cannot forget no matter how hard you try. And I tried hard. Yet for years, the movie haunted me. I had experienced mystery storytelling before already. Like many young readers, I was devouring Agatha Christie and Sherlock Holmes. But The Vanishing exposed me to the singular sensations of suspense cinema. I began learning French at a very early age, and in between lessons and classes would fortify my studies with the dialogue in French films, like Louis Malle's World War II story Au revoir les enfants, or the classic new wave thriller Diva, in which a young bike courier in possession of a valuable cassette tape must outwit a posse of thieves. And this is how, by age 8, I had acquired such useful expressions as, "Hurry, the Nazis are coming." And "Give us the tape, you son of a bitch, and we'll give you your life back." I was a delight at dinner parties, let me tell you. And years later, as a teenager living down the street from an art house cinema, I'd camp out in the front row every weekend and steep myself in film noir retrospectives and classic movie nights and Hitchcock marathons. I chased Harry Lime through Viennese sewers in The Third Man. I watched the conspiring women of Les Diaboliques drown a man in their bathtub. I boarded Nicole Kidman's yacht in Dead Calm, and I checked into the Bates Motel with Marion Crane, who, like my parents at the movie theater, made an early exit. Classic movie making would inspire me as a writer 2 decades on. One night in 2015, whilst parked on my sofa watching Rear Window, I clocked a light in my peripheral vision. My neighbor across the street had switched on a living room lamp, and in accordance with fine New York City custom, I spied on her and watched as she settled herself in her armchair and aimed a remote at her TV. And behind me, on my own TV screen, I heard Thelma Ritter chiding Jimmy Stewart. She said, "I can smell trouble right here in this apartment. You look out the window, you see things you shouldn't see, trouble." And when I turned back to the screen, she was glaring at me. Interesting, I thought, how 60 years on, I'm spying on my neighbors exactly as Stewart did. Voyeurism dies hard. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take one more detour into the past, this time to May 2001, a month of miracles. At my Duke graduation exercises, I delivered a valedictory address widely acclaimed as audible and in English. I lost my virginity, also audibly, also in English. I was admitted to Oxford for doctoral study in the lucrative field of early modernist literature, which meant that one day I might refer to myself as an Oxonian whilst filing for unemployment. And on the 17th of the month, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. Yeah, you're not laughing now, are you? My psychiatrist scribbled a prescription for Zoloft, and I see him clearly, even now, a tall, slender fellow with this luminous haze of golden hair. I sometimes mistook him for a floor lamp. Now, he warned me, "Don't go thinking pills will fix everything." "Of course not," I said, wondering how quickly pills would fix everything. "Chronic depression sinks its fangs into you and you can't shake it loose," said the floor lamp. "It's nicknamed the black dog." So I reflected, and I rejected. I'd grown up with dogs, as had my parents. The walls of my mother's family home in East Hampton were paneled with portraits of poodles past. There was Rumpus flailing in the surf, Tugboat lunging at a French child, Gretchen also lunging at a French child. Oh, how they hated French children. There was a cat, too, rescued from my uncle's fraternity house and named, like any proper fraternity cat, Shitface. But this isn't a story about him. No, dogs, black or otherwise, were no enemy of mine. I could, I mused, liken my depression instead to some other evil, say the 2 hulking, sweaty brutes who beat me up every day throughout elementary school, Bonnie and Maureen. Don't laugh, they will mess you up. Besides, I knew, because I was 21 years old and knew everything, that this illness was but a phase. 1.5 decades on, the depression had blighted and blotted and blackened vast tracts of my life, a cognitive forest fire. And 2 years ago, my diagnosis was reviewed and adjusted, an alternative judgment pronounced, bipolar disorder 2. So up to this point, my depression had raged, dark and dreary, misdiagnosed and mistreated, and man, did I rage back. I medicated, I meditated, I resorted to hypnotherapy, to electroconvulsive therapy, to ketamine therapy, to retail therapy. Most fruitfully, I engaged a psychotherapist, and throughout our first 6 sessions, I simply whimpered and sobbed. It was prom night all over again. On the 7th day, I learned, to my disbelief, that many people, most people even, do not feel ceaselessly sad or bad about themselves. But what about Kellyanne Conway? I argued. My therapist ignored me. What you're experiencing isn't typical, he said. And I thought about this, then told him I couldn't imagine feeling any other way. In her landmark book, An Unquiet Mind, which 20 years on remains the most accessible and inspiring first-person account of depression ever published, Kay Redfield Jamison notes that a severe mood disorder gives you the experience of how it must be to be old or to be slow of mind, to be lacking in grace, polish, and coordination, to be ugly, to have no belief in the possibilities of life or the ability to make yourselves and others laugh. I'm still in my 30s, but already I know well the sensations of hopelessness, of ugliness, of stupidity. Here's the rub. On the surface, I am reasonably rubless. An employer once compared me to a Ferrari, by which I assumed he meant overrated and destined someday to be owned by Asian businessmen. But in fact, he was speaking about my performance. I've thrived on both sides of the Atlantic. I'm like Adele. That is the only way in which I'm like Adele. I was the first reader of the pseudonymous J.K. Rowling manuscript, which my company acquired on my recommendation. I've contributed reviews to major newspapers and periodicals, earning literally tens of dollars in the process. I've taught Forster at Oxford by screening Howard's End on DVD for 2 hungover students. And despite an unprepossessing infancy, during which I won an ugly baby contest at my father's office, I am now semi-fit to be viewed by the semi-naked eye. My Chinese host family even dubbed me Liu Gu Chu Cheng, which translates as 6 out of 10. Yet still I struggled. And on surfacing from the depths or descending from the skies, I would sift through the wreckage with quaking fingers. And again, I quote from An Unquiet Mind, because mine is an unoriginal mind. Who is being too polite to say what? Who knows what? What did I do? Why? And most hauntingly, when will it happen again? Apologies to make, intermittent memories, friendships gone or drained. Bedtime used to prove especially forbidding. Sometimes my mind would swirl and skirl like a bird in a waterspout, and sometimes it was a cat in its cave, poised, wary, green eyes aglow, slim tail a switch. I would brace for the pounce. It rarely failed, but still I sought to distract it. Could it list all 56 Sherlock Holmes stories in order of publication? Could it name the European capitals reverse alphabetically? I would plot a maze and devise 8 ways out. I would review my language lessons. In Portuguese, for example, I can say, "She is not a prostitute, she is my sister." Many discussions of depression lead to, or at least glance askance at, the subject of suicide. And Lord Moran, physician to Churchill until the great man's death, recounted how for his patient, the lure of oblivion glowed like a distant candle, warm and welcoming. "I don't like standing near the edge of a platform when an express train is passing through," Churchill observed. "I like to stand back and, if possible, get a pillar between me and the train. A second's action would end everything. A few drops of desperation." I've never attempted suicide, but in my lower moods, I understand why it's necessary to shy away from the tracks. So what then has sustained? What blazed a trail through the dark? Properly prescribed medication, of course. My mind, once my ally, once my best friend, is mine once again after 15 years at sea. But beyond that, I'm buoyed by the twin virtues of discipline and compassion. Every morning, I arise early and visit the gym, sometimes even going inside. I see my therapist regularly, whatever the weather, internal or external. I practice yoga to the horror of my instructor. "Downward-facing dog doesn't mean you just lie there on your stomach," he'll say to me. And of course, there's literature, my great love. I read voraciously, according to a cast-iron schedule, classics and non-classics, but especially mysteries as they challenge me. They challenge me too much, in fact. I would be the most pathetic detective. I wonder who dies, I'll ask myself on picking up a copy of Agatha Christie's Lord Edgware Dies. To persist with these pursuits, to practice discipline even when disinclined is vital. Discipline shapes my days and leashes my mind, and compassion sweetens my life. For all my legion flaws, my laugh like a machine gun clearing its throat, my instinct to order any menu item that contains the word baby, I am a kind person. And this is the signal gift of my mood disorder, empathy. It's the glinting silver lining, the ruby in the smoke. Only connect Forster entreated us, and I can do that if nothing else. I feel a particular affinity for and tenderness towards anyone who might be perceived or self-perceived as inferior, the physically imperfect, the socially maladroit, the loveless, the luckless, the hopeless, the helpless. I am or have been all these things, and I try to bring those experiences, that hard-won empathy, to the character of a woman who has herself lost all belief in the possibilities of life. Now, if you'll recall, I've written a book. Thank you. And I know you think this speech already feels like a book, but just bear with me. 6 weeks after my diagnosis was corrected in 2015, I felt sufficiently improved to consider some sort of creative pursuit. And the axiom tells us to write what we know, and I knew two things: depression and, from a very young age, mystery storytelling. My parents frequently relocated their brood throughout my childhood, but every summer we would return to my mother's family homestead in East Hampton. This was a sprawling 12-bedroom Victorian down the road from the ocean, complete with a swimming pool and grounds, and I know that sounds glamorous, but the place was borderline condemned. The ladies from Grey Gardens up the block would have swung by and said, "This is not cool." The pool was coated in cut glass stucco so sharp that you would emerge from the briefest of dips bleeding like a Russian royal. The rooms of the house were so multitudinous and so dim that on entering one you might trip over a dog whom no one had seen for weeks, or a child whom no one had seen for weeks. I loved the place, not least because it was stacked and packed with books, almost all of them mysteries. And maybe there's a criminal twist in our DNA helix, but everyone in my immediate and extended families loves a suspense story. I grew up in that house, gorging myself on detective fiction: Agatha Christie, Josephine Tey, Ellen Raskin's The Westing Game, The Hardy Boys. I loved The Hardy Boys. I loved Frank, who was the older, studious, dark-haired Hardy boy. His younger brother Joe was sporty and blonde, and even as a child, I distrusted blondes. I'm not going to look up because I fear I've offended half the audience. During my teenage years, I dove headfirst into Patricia Highsmith and Ruth Rendell, and then as a doctoral student at Oxford, focused on detective fiction, specifically Highsmith's work, after which I launched a career publishing principally crime fiction, including the work of Agatha Christie. And at the same time, as noted earlier, I became obsessed with classic movies. I love the look and tone and pace of older films. They're stylish. They're sophisticated. They take their time establishing their characters and building suspense. By contrast, many modern films rocket forward at a breathless pace and look as though they've been shot and edited without much care or craft. So whilst the story of The Woman in the Window, a story underscored by trauma and grief, presented itself to me only shortly before I started writing it, the genre was a given. And I do hope that the book can travel up and across the market, but at its dark heart, it's a suspense story, and it was ever going to be thus. When I began speaking to you 4 hours ago, I suggested that The Woman in the Window might differ somewhat from much suspense fiction, and certainly it wears the garb of a thriller, chopped up into 100 bite-sized chapters. The narrative is spring-loaded with twists and red herrings as it relates the story of our agoraphobic former child psychologist. But on a deeper level, and here I'm going to get grad school on you for 14 seconds, the story takes seriously Forster's exhortation to only connect. In doing so, it explores the dual phenomena of perception and reality, two concerns of genuine moment in a world held hostage by dueling versions of events, and in an era lived largely in the hall of mirrors called the internet. One thing further before I wrap up: so often in suspense fiction, female characters, even those with starring roles, spend a lot of time fretting about men, or relying upon men, or generally orbiting men. And in my experience, this isn't very realistic. It is, I think, one of the reasons why Lisbeth Salander of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and Amy Dunn of Gone Girl made such an impact. Like many women, they're more than a match for the men in their lives. The heroine of my novel is a mess, and a mess largely of her own making, but I'll say this for her: she identifies an inquiry, pursues an investigation, tests her limits, and all without the help of a man, or indeed anyone. She might not be as crusading as Salander or as controlling as Amy Dunn, but she is no damsel in distress. She's a grown-up, she's a woman, hence the title. I'll wrap up at long last by noting that to date, The Woman in the Window has been sold in 38 territories around the world, making it, we believe, the most widely acquired debut novel ever prior to publication. Fox 2000, makers of Life of Pi and Hidden Figures and The Fault in Our Stars and Bridge of Spies, preempted the film rights, and the producer is Oscar winner Scott Rudin, who made No Country for Old Men, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, The Grand Budapest Hotel, and Lady Bird. And Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, that's hard to say, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Tracy Letts of August Osage County is writing the script. Last week, to my shock, the book debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, the first debut novel since 2006 to do so. And yesterday, we learned that it will retain its spot in the second week. So, suck it, Dan Brown. Yeah. And do I deserve any of this? Nope. Will I take it? Yep. I appreciate your time today, and thank you for welcoming me here. So I'd like to open the floor to Q&A. Do I see future books? I do. In fact, my next book was due on January 2nd, so don't tell my publisher. It will be another psychological thriller, unrelated, set in San Francisco, because I wanted a suitably Hitchcockian locale that was not New York. Yes, sir?
You seem to have a background in cinema. Did you write this viewing it to become a movie?
That's an excellent question. So this sounds like false modesty. I promise it's the truth. When I wrote it, I would have considered it an accomplishment just to tap out the end at the end of the final chapter. I did not have ambitions for publication. Obviously, I was hoping someone would buy it, but I wasn't counting on it. So all this has taken me quite by surprise. I certainly didn't have a movie adaptation in mind. That said, having steeped myself in cinema over the years, I did plot it and write it in scenes. I think the book actually will translate itself pretty readily to film. I don't know why they needed a Pulitzer winner to adapt it, frankly. Please don't tell Tracy Letts I said that. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
I thought you wrote very effectively the woman character.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, is she a composite of people, or is she based on anybody in particular?
So I'm somewhat frequently asked, was it difficult as a man writing a female character? Which I appreciate is not quite what you're asking, but I thought I would get out in front of that.
And I go, this is just, this is a guy
Yep.
in a woman's body. And
Yes.
that was not at all the case.
Oh, I've been called so much worse. But my view is this: whether I create a male character or a female character, it's make-believe. I have decanted a fair bit of myself into this character. We both struggle with mental health. We're both film buffs. She's a big drinker. I'm not. I drink like 4 times a year. Right now, I'm shit-faced. I don't know if you could tell. There's a little of that, too. So I based her, to an extent, on me. In particular, her struggles with her psyche. The circumstances of her trauma are markedly different to my own, but to me they felt comparable in intensity. And I actually found it quite purgative to pour myself into her. Yes, ma'am.
With the depression and all, were you writing during that time, or were you able to, or did this came out after?
Yes. So it was on my birthday when I consulted a psychiatrist, and he diagnosed me with bipolar disorder. Happy birthday to me. And it took about 6 weeks for me to titrate off the old meds and titrate onto new ones. And I'd done this before periodically throughout my 20s and 30s. And every time I feel a bit like the Hulk Bruce Banner turning into the Hulk. I'm just like, "Urgh." That's my impression of the Hulk. But it was apparent about 4 weeks in that this was the correct diagnosis and that the meds were working. And it was around that time that I clocked my neighbor across the street and invaded her privacy. And it was about 48 hours after that I bashed out an outline. So I don't think it's an accident that once I felt significantly improved psychologically, I was able to devote myself to some sort of creative pursuit. Anyone else? Oh gosh, lots. I sort of don't know where to begin. How about at the back? So I've been advised not to answer this question. Nice try. Because I could name 6 actresses and they'd cast the 7th, and I'd be like, Whoopi Goldberg, why didn't I see that coming? And please don't tell Whoopi I said that either. I can tell you that if the film had been made in 1958 by Hitchcock, I would have liked to have seen him cast Jean Tierney, with whom he never worked, possibly because she was a brunette, and he famously liked his blondes. But Jean Tierney was described by Darryl Zanuck, the legendary movie producer, as the most beautiful woman to grace the screen. And hers was a storied life. She had an affair with JFK. She was married to the costume designer Oleg Cassini. She starred in classics like Laura and Leave Her to Heaven. But what most intrigues me about Jean Tierney is this horrific story with which some of you may be familiar about her daughter. During the war, Jean Tierney gave birth to a little girl who was born severely deformed and required a total blood transfusion at birth and spent the rest of her life in an institution. It was heartbreaking. The child had been born with German measles, but no one could figure out how she contracted them in the womb. And a few years later, Jean Tierney was approached by a fan, and this lady said, I was a nurse during the war. I heard you were signing autographs nearby, and so I snuck out of quarantine where I'd been kept with German measles and shook your hand. And that's how it happened. And Agatha Christie was so horrified by this story that she adapted it in the novel The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. So thereafter, Jean Tierney was devastated and had to undergo electroshock therapy. Her life was a sad one. But to me, she projected both the steeliness and the vulnerability that I think this character radiates. Yes, anyone else? Oh, yes. Well, I live in a Manhattan apartment, so my writing space looks like this. I write at a desk, a table. It doubles as my dining table. It's pathetic. Next to a window, and it is through this window that I can look straight across the street in Chelsea and directly into my neighbor's window. And many people who do not live in New York have asked me, oh, is that remotely plausible? No one in New York shuts their windows. I think it's because when you live on top of people and when you're shouldering your way past, that's me shouldering, it's like the Hulk. When you're shouldering your way past people every single day, you sort of phase them out. And it doesn't occur to you that they might be keeping an eye on you. I certainly don't close my blinds, and I've written this damn book. So that's what my writing space looks like. Anything you're imagining is probably better than the reality. So hold on to that. Yes, ma'am. I have a doctorate from Oxford, and yeah. You got a problem with that? Yes, sir.
Your self-description is one of a reader and a watcher, not a writer. How did you make that transition?
So I spent 10 years in the publishing industry as an editor, and I only retired 2 weeks ago. I miss health insurance, I'll tell you that. And during that time, I learned quite a lot about storytelling from these authors, principally crime writers, whom I published. Editing, and indeed publishing a book, is largely a reactive process. Someone hands you raw material, you respond to it. Sometimes you do have to come up with creative solutions, but usually you are responding to someone else's proaction. And so making that leap proved, well, I thought it would prove challenging, actually. The reason I'd never attempted, the reason I'd never had a notion I might be a writer was because I didn't consider myself creative in that respect. I thought I was creative in other respects. And if there's one thing I've learned in my 38 years, it's that there are many, many kinds of creativity. I didn't think I was a storyteller. But then this narrative sort of took shape, distilled itself very quickly in my brain. Whilst writing it, I considered myself both a writer and a reader. I would bash out a chapter, I write sequentially, and then I would review it critically, as an editor would. I'd develop a sort of internal dialogue with myself. That said, this is all semi-new to me. I sold the book to my publisher only 15 months ago, so I'm still not accustomed to referring to myself as a writer. I'm still not accustomed to referring to myself as 38 years old either. But, give me time with that.
Was there a stimulating event associated with any of this?
Adderall. Well, that's a stimulating event, I'll tell you that. No, I think it was really my corrected diagnosis. I switched medications repeatedly over the preceding 15 years, and every single time I thought, all right, this might mark a slight improvement, but I feel numb, or it's killing the sex drive, or I feel dry-mouthed. And this time, none of that. I felt semi-restored. And for fear of losing that feeling, I wanted to explore what I'd been through in print. And I hasten to add, this is not a treatise on depression. This is a thriller. But I'd like to think it's a thriller with more on its mind and in its heart than your average psychological suspense novel. So many of them are like crossword puzzles. They're briefly diverting, you complete them, you throw them away, you forget about them. And I wanted to write something with depth and dimension in the vein of Gillian Flynn and Tana French and Kate Atkinson. And I'm not saying I've succeeded, but that's what I set out to do. Yes, ma'am. George is my ex-boyfriend to whom the book is dedicated. And it was George who said to me, you should write a book. And I figured, for that reason, if none other, he deserved the dedication. Yes, ma'am.
Did you keep any control over the movie to keep it from straying too far from your book?
I did. So that's an excellent question. I was, I'll tell you how it came about. I was in Newark Airport, exotic Newark Airport, when my agent rang. This was 36 hours after we'd submitted the book to English language publishers, and she said, great news, you've got a book deal. And I thought, oh man, I'm just about to head out on holiday with my boyfriend, who is flying from Philadelphia with his French bulldog. And I'm so excited, I'll never forget where I was in Newark Airport when this book offer came in. And my agent said, so just you know, keep your phone on, and we'll see how things look when you land. And when I'd landed 5 hours later, these offers were pouring in from around the world. So I went off to Palm Springs with my boyfriend and his French bulldog, and I spent the entire week soaking in a hot tub and tippling margaritas and snarling at small children. And I felt impossibly powerful and glamorous. And then the universe would kick me down to size. I'd go back to the hotel room and see that Archie had shat in the shower. Archie is the bulldog. Just want to be clear. And so a couple days later, we still hadn't closed any publishing deals because these auctions were hotting up all over the world, and I was in LAX when my agent rang. And the lesson here is I should spend more time in airports because good stuff happens. And she said, well, we've been saying to Hollywood, no, 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 we don't want to entertain any overtures just yet, but Fox won't go away. And they've tendered what they call an exploding offer. And I said, that sounds so like 24. What does that mean? And she said, it means you have to accept or reject the offer right here on the phone. So I'm going to tell you the amount, and you say yes or no. I said, okay. And she said, it's $1 million. Do you want it? Let me think. So I said yes. And my boyfriend was in another terminal, and I wanted to tell someone I just made $1 million, well, $850,000 less my agent's commission, but I wanted to tell someone I'd made a hell of a lot of money. And there was no one near me except for this lovely Japanese family. There was a mother and a father and their child. And I didn't know if they spoke English. I don't speak Japanese. But I did turn to them and smiled and gave them the thumbs up, and bless them, they all turned back and smiled and gave me the thumbs up in response, right? And they never call, they never write, but that was a nice moment. So, given the magnitude of the offer, and this was a buy. Most studios option movies, meaning they'll say, okay, we'll pay you $50,000, and you get 25 grand up front, and then if we make the movie, you get the rest. If we don't, you don't see that money. In this case, they just bought the rights. They did say to me, not very invitingly, do you want to write the script? And it took me all of half a heartbeat to say no, because I've never written a movie script, and this would be a major motion picture, not an opportunity for me to try something new. Given Fox 2000's track record, I felt supremely confident in their abilities. Given the caliber of people with whom they've now associated the film, I feel even more confident. So although I'm going to get some sort of consulting credit, I have no input. And I will say the studio has been tremendously gracious. They flew out to New York in June to host a dinner for me. They flew me out to LA in October to meet the team. I do want a cameo, but the problem is the book takes place almost entirely within a single house. So options are limited. You know, there's a brief scene in a cafe, and I thought maybe I could be like, you know, some diner in the background, but I know myself, and I'm a ham, and I'd keep on like leaning into frame. You know, just sort of like. So I don't think that's going to happen. Yes, ma'am.
What made you decide to use a pseudonym?
Excellent question. I used a pseudonym for 3 reasons. One, at the time the book was submitted, and indeed until 2 weeks ago, I was working in publishing, which is a small industry. And odds were excellent that if I'd submitted the book under my own name, an editor or multiple editors, or indeed most editors, would have recognized my name. And I didn't want anyone to buy the book, or more likely not buy the book, because they knew me. I didn't want to put my finger on the scale. I wanted the book to stand on its own strengths or fall on its own vices. So that was the first consideration. I chose a gender-neutral pseudonym because there are about 8 men working in publishing, and if I called myself Bruce Finn, they would have smoked me out pretty fast. So that was the first reason. The second was that I intended to continue in publishing even after the book was published. Surprise! I thought it would be disconcerting for the authors whom I published to wander into a bookshop and see their editor's name writ large across a hardback. And the third reason, and the most compelling for me, is that, and I recognize I've just spoken to a room full of strangers about my virginity and mental health, but I'm actually an intensely private person. And as A.J. Finn, I feel empowered to speak about anything. As Dan Mallory, my real name, I'm much more closed. I like the gender-neutral option, not because I'm keeping it a secret. I by this point, spoken in front of thousands of people, and my ugly mug is all over the internet, stubble intact. But I do like thinking that if readers were just to see the jacket, they wouldn't necessarily be able to impute to me any sort of story. I'm not particularly interested in authors' bios. I never read the back flaps. My view is I'm buying their novel, not their memoir. I don't want to know about them. So this is my way of taking the author issue off the table. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit more about the process of writing books?
Sure. Well, the process whereby I wrote this book was actually quite fraught because I did hold down a fairly demanding day job, meaning I would have to carve out time at nights and on weekends to write. I fueled myself with Coca-Cola, Cherry Coke Zero, and only recently kicked that habit about 2 months ago, and that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But that's how I would caffeinate myself, and these days I use Earl Grey. I would park at my desk for hours at a stretch. As I said in my speech, I'm quite disciplined when I need to be and could just bash away. I prepared a 7,500-word outline before tapping out a single word of prose, so I knew exactly what was going to happen to whom and when and how it would all end, and that was a particular concern for me. I've read far too many books, especially suspense thrillers, that don't stick the landing, which is a shame because it's the last thing you remember about a book. It'll determine your assessment of the entire read, and I really wanted to nail that ending. I listen to electronica when I write, or pop music in a language I don't understand, because I like upbeat music, but I don't want to think about the lyrics. So it was pretty much catch as catch can. I wrote 2/3 of the book over the course of 11 months, and then I bumped into my agent at an event, and she said to me, "Well, I want your book at the start of September," and this was the start of August, and I thought, shit, and then I popped open some Cokes and churned out the last third in August. My hope is that with this next book, I will be much more regimented, and as I don't have a day job anymore, I'll be able to work more normal hours. Yes, sir?
You ever done stand-up comedy?
I have not. Oh, thank you, sir. I have no witty response, which is why I should not be a stand-up comic. But thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to ask Grace, during the time you were depressed,
Mm-hmm.
is your sense of humor more than it was now? Or
Oh no, I've always my family are very, very waspy, and like really waspy. But like many wasps, they've all got a sort of brittle sense of humor. And I'm trying to think of an example that will not get me into trouble with Child Protective Services, but it can't. No, I really can't. I like to laugh, and I like reading authors who make me laugh, like Evelyn Waugh and Carl Hyacin. And sometimes I would feel so terrible that humor seemed absolutely impossible to appreciate. But there is, to me, nothing better than feeling amused. So I'm glad that depression, far from obliterating that, probably honed it and enhanced it and helped me appreciate it more. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
There's been a little mini trend of thrillers and with unsympathetic characters.
Oh, I think it's a major trend. Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I call it a mini one because I hate them and quit reading them.
Oh.
For the most part.
Bye.
Yeah. No, I thought your character, it was interesting because she was both sometimes unsympathetic and sometimes sympathetic.
Oh, good.
You kind of figure out what's going on with her, and I thought that was really intriguing. I guess what I was going to ask is how do you feel about unsympathetic characters?
Well, in the first place, thank you for saying that. I too have read quite a lot of these books, and quite a lot of the time I have wanted to shake the protagonists, usually women, by the shoulders and say, get a grip. You're no fun. And so often it's because, as I said during my little spiel, all they care about is men. They're whining about their boyfriend, they want a baby. And these are valid concerns, but god damn, spending an entire book with that. And also, usually someone is trying to kill these women, so you're like, don't you have something more pressing to worry about? So, I didn't want this character to be a saint, because that's hard to relate to, and it's not very compelling, is it? She's a flawed woman. She is, I think, a complicated woman, but I'm pleased to hear you found her at times sympathetic. I ended up quite liking her. She goes to some dark places, but I enjoyed spending time with her. She's sometimes witty, sometimes outright funny. She's intelligent, she's resourceful, she's educated. Yeah, I kind of have a crush on her now that I say that loud. I'm sorry, I forgot the second half of your question.
Me too.
That's all right. But I'm the one on Adderall. I have no excuse. That's all right, there you go. Oh, sorry, how do I feel about unsympathetic narrators? It depends on how they are limbed. If Patricia Highsmith is doing it and she does it really well, then I'm sort of awestruck. What so enthralls me and disturbs me about Patricia Highsmith, author of The Talented Mr. Ripley and Strangers on a Train, is how she subverts crime fiction. Crime fiction is supposed to be morally educative. That's why it's so popular. If you read a Sherlock Holmes story, you know that at the end, order will be restored, the guilty will be punished, the virtuous saved or rewarded. Highsmith upended all that. She presented as her main character a killer, a sociopath, and yet she gets us to root for him even as he commits the ultimate transgressions. And this, especially to someone as constitutionally law-abiding as I am, was thrilling and disturbing in equal measure. How does she do that? How does she get us on his side? It's a kind of black magic. So when she does it, I'm fascinated by unsympathetic narrators. Same with Ruth Rendell. Same with Gillian Flynn. I know Gone Girl was a divisive book for many, but man, it totally worked for me. I won't name names, but with other books, I don't think they're so well done, and I just get annoyed with the characters and don't care. In fact, this is the third person I'm going to ask you guys not to talk to. I don't like Matt Damon much. I know, I just don't. And so I'm watching The Martian right now, and who's that? Matt Damon is the suggestion, yes. So for the past 8 months, I've been trying to watch The Martian, and every 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, he's not going to die, is he? So I stop. But then, like 2 weeks later, I'll think, maybe he dies. So I start watching again. My favorite movie of all time is The Departed, because he gets shot in the head. If you haven't seen The Departed, he gets shot in the head. Anyone else? No one? Okay. Oh, yes, thank you. Were you, oh, yes, we're done. Jan, could you hold up the sign that shows how I know we're done? It says done. Thank you.